Let's get into this beauty first to the conventions questions. Got to do a little bit of some scrolling. Step one, I'd look here, I'd look here. I see no other dash with which to make a bridge. I see no other comma with which to make a bridge, or obviously no list. So step number one falls. Step number two, these guys are equivalent, so they're both going to be off the table now permanently. Then I'm just kind of chilling to see if I pause or not. We don't pause. The more correct answer is that we don't separate a subject from its verb, but we don't have to talk about that. Next one, I see I'm in the conventions question, but these guys are so long, they're so big, and they seem to be like similar words kind of shifted around in the sentence. So I know it's going to be some sort of modifier question. So I go to the start of the sentence and I see that we're looking for a government body to be the subject, right? The essence, the first essential element. As I go through this, A would be saying that the parliaments are a government body. B says that a parliament is a government body, which is pretty cool. This speaks to the fact that a singular meeting would be a government body. And then this would be saying that a year is a government body. So that ain't no government body. This is a bunch, not all this one. So it falls. And then B is our attractive choice. Cruising 17. When I immediately look to 17, I want to consider these guys in step one. This would be such a beautiful choice. And I go looking to the text and I see the semicolon working together with the coordinating conjunction, which means I might have a list, but I want to make sure that I've got three things in this list. So there is my first thing. There is my second thing. It would be our item itself. And then our first thing in our list is overseeing. List starts here. Everything's cozy and cute. So I move on, rocking with Charlie. As I look to A, I see semicolon, right? Which would be so adorable for a step one, and lists or bridges. When I go looking for a complex lists, I don't see one, so this falls for step one. When I look at D, I see a bunch of possible bridges. I see no list, but I do see a lot of possible bridges. Now, if a student were to choose one of these guys and say that there's a bridge, that's pretty based, because this is the right answer. But when we make bridges, we'd read over them, and nothing really feels good when we read over it. So technically, step one falls. In step two, we would see that these two are equivalent, so they're off the table. And then I just ask again, homies, plug it in, read it. Would you pause? This one, you most definitely would. And who cares about the grammar that underlies this process? 19 and 20. While it's tempting to go straight for lists and bridges with these, I mean, how creative, SAT. We have a transition word inside of a conventions question. So we're not going to do the usual strat. We're going to pivot to something else. Step one is going to be omit the transition and test for period. Right? Because you're testing to see if there's a complete sentence on either side. Since there's no colon here, we'd be able to identify, are we hanging out over here or are we hanging out over here? When I do this strategy, I put in a period here, and this left side seems kind of disgusting, right? I don't like it. What's going on over here? I don't have a complete sentence. More technical reasons could show that this is an infinitive with just a relative clause, but we don't have to know that. The left side just doesn't feel good. The left side feels gross. C falls. D falls, and then we're just left with these two. And then we ask ourselves to consider in step two, donde está? Where is the, in this case, contrast? I just really love avoiding this guy as a nice general rule of thumb, but we can go looking for the contrast and be a little bit better. As I try to explore where it is, I see that the contrast seems to be primarily software is in contrast with occasionally tradish. Right? It is this transition word hanging out in the center that allows the mobility to move to the front. So this thing right here, this option gives me the possibility of putting it right here, which demonstrates the correct relationship between these two sentences. So A gets my pick. A beautiful thing. Then I move on to 20, and I'm going to do the exact same two steps. I'm going to test for a complete sentence on either side. I totally feel like there is one on either side, as should you. Therefore, these both fall. And then in step two, I go looking for the contrast, right? C would be saying that the contrast, if we were to number, I'm going to use the word sentences, even though it wouldn't necessarily be that. This would be like 1, this would be 2, and then 3. 2 is saying that the contrast seems to be between 2 and I guess 3. There'd be a subordinate clause and then some sort of independent clause coming to the right. And then B is saying that it's between 1 and 2. And since the undifferentiated, as described defined a little bit better there. Interacts with they are hardly pristine. I'm going to run with B as the right answer. 21 is the only one so far in all of these questions for which there really is no concrete strat. We would test for this one in step 1 and this one with lists and bridges, but there ain't nothing. So both of these guys fall a glorious death. Then in steps 2, none of these are equivalent. That falls too. In step 3, the complete sentence mix-up, that doesn't fall either. Now, step 4 has casually been to kind of punt or do whatever you want, but it's also been a concept that's kind of dabbling in like, well, what does a colon do? What does a semicolon do? If you chose one of these, we're in an absolute pickle because there's like a whole bunch of grammar stuff that you'd have to know in order to know it's not B and C, because you just don't feel like there's a complete sentence to the left. But to teach why there is one requires so much. Like we'd have to find verbs and subjects, understandings of prepositional phrases and like noun phrases and determined phrases. We have to know things like complementizers exist, so that would alter types of clauses. We would have to know more things about prepositional phrases or noun phrases. Then we'd have to realize that certain clauses can be subjects of their own clauses. We would have to recognize different verb forms, which really sucks. This being a past participle, more prepositional phrases, dipping into whatever's going to be over here. Like this level of diagramming is just like way too much for us to know it's not B or C, that we do have a complete sentence to the left. So we're going to ignore all of that and pretend I didn't say it. And instead just hope that we didn't like these guys for some sort of ocular reason. It's like, oh, gerunds, they're objects, gerunds as subjects with their own verbs of independent clauses. It's also beautiful, but it's too hard to do in a classroom setting, right? Hang out with me at lunch. Hopefully we narrowed it down to these two things. And then we could do something great from there. We've talked a lot about how colons do something cool. This, we've practiced this for this kind of reason. Exemplification. What on the right exemplifies what on the left, right? So I'd be asking you, if you like the colon here, you would be having to give me what on the right exemplifies what on the left. And that's where you'd have to do some mad cope to try to come up with some sort of explanation for this colon. Then this would fall, and then we're just going to pick this player. But, man, if you pick B or C, there's nothing that we can do. These we get into a much more comfortable ground. In the affirmation, we'll start with that in particular is correct. I've got maize and wheat are a particular example of the certain grains that are chilling out over here. And then I've got the reconfigured ... into, which is an example of the radical transformation. Easy peasy. In this one, it's very tempting to operate between these two things, right? Moreover, it's like a likewise, a new add of sorts, whereas, for example, would be in the same vein, exemplification, obviously. We have to be critical, right? And they give us gifts. This word pops out at me. This word pops out at me. Stamp is not weaving, right? These are different concepts. Just like think about them. These are clearly different concepts, but both support the overarching concept of our boy, Benny Frank, trying to stop these counterfeiters. So since I have two different things supporting an overarching idea, I've got a more over. Now we're on to these. The easy peasy ones require just the goals, and we try to live on this right side, ignoring the left. Then if we only survive with a bunch of goals, then we go peeking to the left and we kind of kill liars. Ones that aren't doing what they proclaim to do on the right side. This is an absolutely easy peasy one. Pretty much every single one of you guys got this one right. We're speaking to identify what type of scientist this Dahomey is. This leaves out Dahomey and all types of scientists. At least this says a group of scientists. This says the word scientist, which is chill, but I can draw all of our beautiful lines between these concepts. This is a mess because I don't care too much about it, but I just want to present that this one is as simple as it seems. We live in the right side. 10 questions. We've satisfied the goal. What type is he? Sedimentologist. Gorgeous. 25 is as simple too. It might be tempting at first to go after the completed, but then just be critical. You kind of run into the fact that every single one of these could be correct. So that must not be our clue. Dig into another clue on the left side with the goals before we go looking for liars on the left. So I extract the notion of like the year. This ain't got no year, this ain't got no year, this ain't got no year. But this is a year, right? And since there's just one, I don't really have to even check it for accuracy. I like this one. Oh, I like that one too back there. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. So remember, Step one, we try to fight the fight on the left. I'm trying to overview, right? An overview of findings. A critical discernment of this doesn't give us the findings, right? That's not overviewing anything. It's way too general. And I can tell that right off the rip. But when I look at B, C, and D, I know I'm going to do some mad cope to try to justify one over the other one. And when I'm in that position, that means the goal process is done, and I have to move on to the liars. Now that we go through the liars, it gets a little bit more complicated. The main bullet points, it seems to be like this language right here. These are the bullet points of results. And then once you extract that, we can look back to the right side. When we plug this one in, both sides of this are true, so he can survive. When I start looking at this one, the first half seems pretty chill, right? This relates to bullet point number 2, and this relates to bullet point number 3. But as I try to cash out the second part, this is disgusting, right? I have no information on the notes that can support that, so it's a liar, thus banished to Deathland, and I don't care about him. Then when I look at these two, it's tempting that it says the word researchers, and we like the word researchers, but we're trying to overview the study's findings. And when you look at this gives us just a narrow look at 2 and 3, whereas this one, this first part of the sentence differed in the number of syllables spoken. That engages with bullet points 2 and 3, which is adorable. And then this one engages with bullet point 1, which is like the overviewiest overview before it breaks down into the minutia. Therefore, D's are cutie patootie, because this kind of leaves out a finding, you could say. This looking to the left is obsessive and frustrating and take a lot of time, especially if you're chasing ghosts in other questions where it doesn't matter. That's why for a large part of the year, we were just trying to live and fight on the right to get good at this. 27 is an example of why I don't want us kind of living in the left, because this notion of like within its historical context should point us to the right answer A, because this absolutely beautiful recognition of start and end, right? This alone is where I picked this and just moved on with my life without looking towards the notes. But I saw that about 70% of us picked some of these. Since we didn't appreciate the historical context of these things, let's talk about B and C. If you chose B, I genuinely have no idea why you didn't feel torn between A and B. And then if you chose D, I feel similar to like, well, why didn't you like B? Any way that you slight this, had you not just like absolutely loved and adored A because of its beautiful recognition of a historical context with start and end point, if you didn't love that, you should have gone looking over here to start dealing in facts. C was just kind of gross and nobody picked it, so let's get him off the table. When I'm dabbling between A, B, and D, I have to be critical, and this can be complicated. B starts off pretty cute, speaking, I guess, to historical context, and all that's true. Einstein did do a disagree with Bohr. However, when you look at this detail here, this thing is not Bohr's argument, it is Chaboy Einstein's argument. So then B is a liar. That takes off the one that was like the biggest wrong choice. And then we're looking at D. Let's get him off the table. You probably liked it for similar reasons of this, but you probably did like a weird cope to pick one of them. This is chill. I'm sure they did. You could just say that this like famous plus this is the historical context. Fine. I'll like grant that concept for now, even though D's wrong. But it's the second half that I think is pretty gross. This would remain popular decades after. Absolutely robs the context that's presented here. This is the most widely accepted theory, right? Notice our beautiful presentation of A where it gets would become, right? This is it. This is the idea. That's the context. I would say that D, not only does it fail at historical context in the Einstein's argument part, I don't really want to fight my battle there. I just think like this is like a pathetic presentation of the historical context because it doesn't give us the start and end that's there. Different lenses could like look at this through Einstein's argument and the presentation of it. But I think that in this first fight, I really love the domination of this historical context. And those are the controllables. Then we start getting into the very frustrating unknown questions. We've practiced a lot in class about signal elements and context clues. Signal elements being things like this situation telling us where to look. For example, this throws it back to few formal. We see that this is going to push us forward, that this person is going to do something, they chartered something, went on to, but like at the end of the day, these really just come down to vocabulary checks, because in the hard section, there have been so many questions that we've felt good about, but we just don't know what the words are. Like we felt good about over here, but not on the right side. So we can just like give the answers and stop me from being super duper sad because we don't know what certain words mean, right? Like painstakingly, repeatedly leads to arduous. But if we just don't know what arduous means, well, then we're absolutely in a pickle. This is such a complicated one with so many different context clues. We've got our signal element, colon, screaming at us to look on this side. But at the end of the day, just demarcated, it's a weird word, and we might not know what it means. And these are all kind of weird words that we might not know what they mean. And when we don't know two of them, and the answer is one of the two that we don't know, we're pretty darn cooked. As for question 4, the last one of these, there's just so many words in here that are so frustrating. It's just notional, and we'll move on with our lives to the more controllable questions that we can feel good about or bad about having missed. Question 5, I think we should feel agency in getting right. When I look at question 5, in these ones that give me poems or stories, kind of all bets are off in terms of the strategies. With poems especially, I give this a little quick read, then I go for this one. I know that it's asking for this portion, but I'm going to read the entire poem just because it's so abstract. Maybe it's metaphorical, and I'm going to go for it. As I read this, I see, a story. A story about a day. I read it. You read it. We're good. Now we start going to the items. This is another reason why I read the entire thing when I see a poem, is because that when it says described in the text, even though we're speaking to the underlined portion, it's extending beyond. That's what makes it a hard question. If you liked 5A, something that I would ask you for in this one is, where are you getting the responsibility concept, right? I like a lot of the things that are surrounding it, right? We do see some change that's there, but this is the line that probably confused you and like gave you the agency of responsibility. And I might believe you if it said like by its whirl, right? That would give the nature that was surrounding the responsibility to be responsible. But as it's chilling right now, there's no responsibility that we can attach to it. A falls, I move on. When I look at B, it establishes an example of consistency in natural landscape that the speaker then contrasts with the unpredictability of this. In this one, I think the change was the easy part to find. So we've already dealt with the fact that things are not consistent. We've got a little shake to a whirl, so B can fall for that reason. When I look at C, it presents an observation of an occurrence in the natural world. So far, like, yeah, something's happening, that the speaker then expands on to convey a sense of a turbulent interior state. Maybe if we don't know what turbulent means, we just like drop it from our usage, and it's just like the interior state, right? And I can appreciate that both of these concepts are here. So C is pretty cute, but poetry's hard, so I'll read D. As I dig into D, I notice that it evokes the ordinariness of an event in nature to suggest that this maybe I'm fine with. The critical self-evaluation the speaker engages in, maybe I'm fine with, but then it's this part, is a common pursuit. Maybe you like everything in here, but this common pursuit, if it is cashed out in terms of like all people do these things, well, where is that evidence? And if it's like that this person constantly does this, where is that? That there's no common means there's no D. We land on C and we move on with our life. B was one where we're doing the underlined function one, but it's not poetry, so maybe we can just go straight for it. When I read it, for example, the first join, the work is completed. Maybe when you read this word is awkward. If you're ever in an underlined portion and you need something to find, then maybe you could go looking around. When I look around, I see the concept like of a join is given here, right? Where things are fused together. And that's all I need. I go right back into it. The join that the work is completed exhibits a clear misalignment of the borders of the two panels, right? They're stitching stuff together, it seems. Whereas the later joins are virtually invisible. So then I go into it. The underlined sentence, right? This thing that said, for example, threw it back to the previous sentence that I could go looking for if I wanted to. This underlined portion does not identify the people and events, right? To not get egregious with my things, I'll just do the and the identifies. B, it supports an argument, right? I like the word supports because we've got the for example about the workers who produced it, right? Maybe this is a little bit abstract, but it does say the workers and it does say the workers, so I'll table B and move on to C. It compares the tapestry with other tapestries from 11th century France. Nothing about this does that, right? Maybe the the join conversation put us on tilt, but one thing can have multiple panels. Just think of your car. Multiple panels go around your car, but there's still just one car. You don't have multiple cars because you have multiple panels. Other tapestry falls. And then just this where. I ain't got no where. And then B's the right answer, right? We're supporting the argument about the workers who produced it. The thing that produced it, we can look behind and we can look here. C. C is frustrating, right? It's another story thing. So kind of all bets are off in a sense. You can give the sucker a read and then start digging into the left. Something that I'd say, and you can do this on the computer, is it's using so many dashes and parentheses to frustrating degree where there's the overarching thing that's said here that we can like read and appreciate. And then there are all these like individual mini tangents, which are frustrating. I won't do the other part yellow because that'll get a little cluttered. So there are all of these ideas. I read it. I read this probably twice super fast, and then I came back ready to attack these answers. I want to stay on one at a time though, right? Just how methodical I was through here. If I squiggle too much, I want to go back. So, though it is true that the stories of even the most uninteresting people are themselves interesting, because all people are unique. I don't like this already, right? All people are unique. Him is perfectly ordinary. That seems to betray here, but I'll keep reading. The reason this story is interesting is nonetheless difficult to understand. Difficult to understand because of the passage of time. I lock in on this time part because that's where I feel like it can fight. But that we intend to tell here, we just read the red. The story of Hans that we intend to tell here is a story that took place long ago and is, so to speak, covered with the patina of history and must be necessarily be told with verbs whose tense is that of the deepest past. There's nothing about this confirmed by the red. And I also don't like this part of uniqueness. When I look to B for 7, even though it is a story of no particular importance, I actually appreciate that so far. Its age and manner in which it is there, in which it therefore must be told, right? Manner in which means how, we can cash that out, and how it's told are both indicators that the story itself is important. My juggling of time in this first one helps me understand that this is wrong, but when I look back to the text, we have this piece of evidence. The sake of the story itself is worth telling. And then that falls, that same kind of concept that helped me there. When I look to C, I give C a read. Like all stories about the lives of inconsequential people, this story must be necessarily be related in a particular way if the reason the story is consequential is to be made evidence to the audience. When I read this, like most of you guys, this one's just a lot of words in a construction that's a lot to unpack. So I'm going to table this and I'm going to come back to it and hope that I can love D or hate D and then pick C. It is a remarkable story that happened to an unremarkable person. So we've got it is a remarkable story, which we've already confirmed with the sake of the story. An unremarkable person we have up here, perfectly ordinary. I dig that. Though one could possibly argue that the story is valuable, right? We already have that evidence. Some of its value accrues to the person at the center. Maybe we struggle with this word, but we can go looking to the text and we see it should be noted that it is his story. And this agrees with all of these things. So let's say we're stuck between two and there's like this word that you don't really know, an entire sentence that you can't really unpack to make sense of things. Just go with the one that you have so much evidence for and like maybe we get this one wrong because there's a word that we don't know. But then when we look back with a more critical lens at C to understand it, like all stories about the lives of inconsequential people, this story must necessarily be related. No, this statement is almost saying like it's boring, so we have to try hard. But it's like, no, dog, the story is lit and we love it just the way it is. It's just a pretty good story, apparently. Never read it. Complexity increases. Absolutely does the complexity increase. So for these, we've got to start doing some strat stuff. So I'm living in a question that's asking about a researcher's conclusion, so I can go looking for it. Researcher's dated seems to be conclusion language, but I've got some sort of signal element that's telling me stuff here. When I read this and I try to understand it, lithospheric and mantle-derived rocks, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Or I don't know what I'm reading. I know what I'm talking about. Well, when I read this transition is telling me something like, hey, dog, you need to find what this transition is. So I'll go one sentence back. I'll unlock that concept just so that I don't become too overwhelmed. I read this and I come up with a summary that there are two kinds of rocks, lith and mantle. And the transition is like 3.2, their conclusion is like 3.2 billion, they mixed. That's kind of like all I need from this question. I feel so secure that this is the detail that's being presented here. 3.2 billion years ago, right? So like if this is now, reach back in time, 3.2 billion, not mix, mix. And that's what I want to kind of appreciate. Maybe you could read more up here, who knows, to get a better understanding, but I'm going to run to these items and start trying to kill some of these suckers. When I read A, it's talking about rocks kind of like over here, older than, significantly more are mantle than lithosphere, but the opposite is true. So like we have more mantle over here, and then we have more litho over here. This is like comparing like an absolute number of rock, and I want like a transition of mixage. This significantly more. I don't think that's what we're talking about here. A falls and I soldier on. When I read B, mantle-derived rocks older than 3.2 billion years, so I'm over here again, show significantly more diversity than lithospheric rocks older than 3.2 billion years. But this doesn't support what I'm looking for either, right? Compositional diversity would be like that they're mixed. Why would one be mixed and the other one's not mixed? I want to shift at this point to support mixage. I don't know what that's talking about. I moved to C, and this is this crazy conversation about positive correlation. So correlation are that two variables move together. They could be up or down. So there's a positive correlation between the age of lithospheric rocks and their chemical similarity to mantle-derived rocks. So this is saying that age goes up, similarity goes up, and that correlation increases significantly in strength around 3.2 billion years old. So this is saying that there's a mix, but that mix gets mixier and mixier as we go this way. But the reading comprehension from this would show that this is the point at which they are least mixed, and it increases this way. So this whole conversation about this is inverted and whack, and I just land on D, that mantle-derived rocks younger than 3.2 billion, so we'll try to use a different color. So what we're chilling over here contains some material that is not found in older mantle, which is awesome, right? How did it happen? How does this have stuff that over here didn't? Well, it's because they mixed, which is cool. So I like the first part. And then we continue, but is found in older, right? Oh, why would it be in older lithospheric rocks? Well, because it mixed in this time period. So D's cute. I'll select it and move on. We've got another conclusion to go looking at. Support the researcher's conclusion. I go looking in the text for a conclusion. I like the last sentence, and it says this conclusion, but this conclusion, this signal element is going to toss me back a sentence. So I go back a sentence to try to find something, and I go to summarize it. You could read more if you like, but we're going to try to fight this fight here. Now, if there's ever a term you don't understand, like in this last one, if there's a term that you really didn't understand, you can go looking with a purpose, but I'm going to try to fight my fight right here. I read their thingy thing, and just like I did with the previous rocky rocks, I'm going to try to summarize this. Giving it a quick read, what the conclusion it seems to be that there was a shift in behavior because electric lighting, right? Electric. This isn't much of a summary, but this is just very easy to understand once you know where to look. And then we've got a very important detail about like in the late 19th. Okay, in the late 19th century, there's a shift in behavior because electric lighting, and I want to support that conclusion. So just like the last time, I just try to dig into these and make sense of things. And if I need any terms, I can go look at. When I read A, novels published after the year 1800 include the clock phrase 10 a.m. or less. 10 a.m. less often than novels published before the year. So this is weird because this is putting all of the burden on the year 1800s when it seems to be the late 19th century, which is like the late 1800s. So already on this one, I feel like we're dropping the concept of like late 19th century. But I'm not just going to either kill him or pick him. I'm going to see, like, is there anything else about this that I can dig? And I'm just going to put a little squiggy poo and move on. When I read the next one, I do appreciate how much better this matches my scheme of what the 19th century is, or the late 19th century is. And then I provide something with which to juxtapose these two. It's at this point where I'm not going to try to put too many things on my plate, because I really do think I have a good understanding of this text, and I don't want to just rush through these things. So as I'm staring at these two, and I consider, like, is something at 10 a.m. going to better prove electric lighting causing a shift, or would 10 p.m.? It's just obviously like at 10 a.m. I don't know like what activities would be done that necessitate a shift by electric lighting. Whereas like if somebody's saying like, well, 10 p.m., what could electric lighting do? I could imagine they're staying up late to take another SAT and make a video about it or something fun like that. But who knows what they did back in the 1880s, if not that. So I really like B. B's comfortable. It matches my schema. If I can make a yap about why 10 p.m. matters for a shift in behavior because of electric lighting, and it has a great year. When I'm reading C, I've got in the 19th century, so we're cooking, right? Big range, but we keep reading. Implied time references become steadily more common than clock phrases as publication dates approach 1900. So I do like how this is shifting. But then the same fight that I had between the 10 p.m.s up here, I'm going to try to have between the notions here. If you want to know what implied time or clock phrases, maybe we could go looking in the text, and it is there. But I just want you to, I'm trying to explain with electric lighting, the lens that this matters. And I don't know why we'd have more vague implied time references rather than clock phrases. I just can't engage with the electric lighting as well as I can with like, well, it's nighttime in this. So C falls. D just has nothing to do with the shift, and it's pretty garbage, so just get it out of there. B is our right answer. We're picking it and move on. Let's go to these scary graph questions. Oh my gosh. How are we going to approach this sucker? So right off the rip, what we can do is we can read the last sentence, see that there is a signal element that's going to bounce us back a sentence, and we can read this. While we read this, we can probably not understand what it's saying, but we can try to contextualize it with the chart. When I go to read this, right, and let's just pretend that we don't have good or our reading comprehension wasn't strong enough to decode this. When I read this, I realize I'm screwed. Because when I try to put things on this chart, I see region 1, I see the time periods as they pop up, but like efficiency, I have no idea what efficiency is. I can like, all right, I'll come back to you. Maybe you're something that's not on the chart. But when I'm looking at B, I'm seeing efficiency again. I know from this question that this question is so hard, and it's because this question is forcing you at this very moment to engage with that part that we probably read right here that we don't really understand. And it's so frustrating. This is just such a tough question, right? There may be liars, but with efficiency being such a prevalent concept, I know that this isn't going to be a free, let's knock it off. So you have to read this and you have to understand this. There might be terms that you look above to try to contextualize, but when you read this, it really is just a huge gift if you can read the notion and see that government efficiency increases. Like, I don't want to say it's a positive correlation. I don't want to necessarily say it's causal, but this is saying like that government efficiency increases, thus that GDP can increase. It's this concept that's so critical, because I'm going to just like extrapolate that the inverse would be true, right? That government efficiency dipping would cause the GDP to dip. It's this, and this is tough, right? I'm saying right now, like this question sucks. Once you start realizing that terms are essential, right? I see government efficiency in every single one of these. Once you see this, we might just be cooked, right? Once I realize this notion, I can start digging into the chart. Region 1, 0 to 14, experience a decline from the previous one. And I know because of this, I'm looking here and here, that I'm looking to these things, it does decline, and I really like this choice. When I look to these, it's so easy once we realize this concept, even though this is a world of concept to try to decode. This one's making the statement that region 1 experienced a slower rate of, despite increasing. Yeah, so this is the opposite. There was decrease, not an increase. So it's a liar because of this right here. When I look at C, I can look at the numbers, and this would be leading us here for C. They do go up. However, or actually we can just table this guy. He survives. When I look to D and I dig through him, the statement is not true, right? Generally became more efficient. They didn't generally became. This one did, this one didn't. Falls. But this is hard. Then when I'm stuck between A and C, I have nothing in the text that would support this. Several countries in the region did not. I'm just admitting that this question is wildly hard. I want to try to like say like, I'll fight it from the rates thing, because for them to calculate like the ranges per years and do all that math is just like absurd and not where it's going to be asked. But the real trick to this is to just have the reading comprehension to decode this, and then everything falls through. But I'll take an L on this question. I think this is probably the hardest question. When I look to 11, I can approach it. Let's try it in the exact same way. I see that it's talking about an assertion. I see that the sentence discusses an assertion. I don't really understand what it's saying. I try to contextualize it with A. As I read A, I'm in a much better spot though, because this is talking about things that are on the chart, right? I see processing import with inputs. I do appreciate that that's something that's on the chart. When I look to the next number, I've got ordinary inputs, or the next element, it's got this. These are all things that can be on the chart. So I can fact check this sucker. When I fact check this sucker, I see that this is not bigger than those. So in this one, we can eliminate a liar. What a beautiful little gift. And then that can fall. But then we've got to do the hard digging for the rest of them, right? Because then we're going to have to come back to reading comprehend in this unpleasant sucker. So from 2000 to 2006, so we're kind of looking at all colors. Processing imports with inputs rose. So rose more sharply than processing imports with assembly did. Okay. I dig the statement. It's like true, I guess. I don't know. I'll come back to you. When I read C from 2006, neither processing imports nor assembly. So let's change colors just so that we can have a little bit of a better look-see for this one. So it's saying that neither these nor these were greater than these. And each individual number absolutely tracks. Darn. So this one's true, so he survives. And then we go looking to the last one, and it's saying that processing imports with assembly is greater than this, which is true. Dang. So now we have to dig into the sentence, and this is tough, right? When we read this, we can kind of see that two of the items ask us to engage with these concepts, and then one of them's asking us to engage with all three. Decoding what this is saying to us is everything. As it speaks of the efforts of trade liberalization, we can go looking to what that means. That we can trade liberalize by expanding into this, the processing imports, which is this and this. When we read what these are saying with a little bit more discernment, we can see there's also another wildly important clue, which is like this limited capital thing, right? We're trying to demonstrate that we're shifting away from the original, which should really put C in a bad light, because it's asking us to engage with the start. And the fact that this is greater than all of them at all points is like a very big L for trade liberalization. And that alone probably could kill C. But we'd really get C out of the way, because by saying limited capital with a resolution, we need like a transformation from needing capital to not. This demands that we understand what this extends capital means. Once we understand that processing with inputs is where we want to be, and we're shifting away from like the borrowing of assembly, we can appreciate what the answer is. C falls for the doublet reasons of I don't really care about liberalization, and this kind of dunks on our point, but it also doesn't engage with limited capital. And then when I look at B and D, D is pretty disgusting. And the reason why D is disgusting is because this being higher than this could present, I'm not saying it does, could present a horroring picture as if we never overcome this thing. But it's at looking at the trend of all 3 years that we see that we've resolved the limited capital of assembly by exploding with the processing with inputs. B is the right answer. Our final section, to logically complete the text, are absolute most favorite swings. 12, 13, 14. When I look at 12, something that we can do is we can go right to the last sentence. But when I read the last sentence, given originated and diffused into what now became, and I go to try to plug this into A, I realize I have no idea what I'm reading. So I can go back a sentence and read this. It says, however, so that's another signal element that could kick me back a sentence. And it's at this point where I feel pretty darn comfortable. My reading comprehension as I engage with this concept kind of shows me, and I'm doing this geographically, that there's a Mexico. There's a Mexico. My reading comprehension is so strong. We've got this U.S. South tribe, and then we've got this U.S. North tribe, right? This is like spatially how it seems to be set up in my mind. I've got an understanding of this thing. I reread the final sentence now that I have a good contextualization over this, right? The fact that they do not share, right, isn't shared between D's homies. despite the crop's universal cultivation, right? Even though they all use it. No language, even though they all use it. Then the final sentence restates that it seems to have started here and diffused this way, right? If we get this wrong, I feel like we don't know what diffused means. But it started here and then went up. Then I start engaging with one at a time. When I look at A and it's talking about this tribe here, directly from here, this completely breaks my logic, right? If North got crop from South, why the heck would they not have gotten some of the language? A is an easy fall. It's harder from here, though. When I look at B, variation in maize-related vocabulary within each branch of the family, right, both of these people, reflects regionally specific methods for cultivating crops. This one falls because what the text is expressing is that vocabulary started here and then went upwards. This focus of like, well, the reason there's no is because they've got different strats, and that's what we would attribute to. It betrays the kind of geographical labor that seems to be presented here. And it's just so odd that we would go, okay, so they really totally talked about all of this stuff together, but they decided on different techniques, so then they dropped all the language. Just that logic kind of gives me the ick. B falls. Let me go be more specific, right? This regionally specific method directly from that falls, and it's for these reasons. I don't like these. When I look at C, the South got it at the same time as the North, though from different sources. I don't know if I'm going to fight my battle here, but it's just roughly the same time. Maybe this is a lot of my reading comprehension doing some heavy lifting, but the diffusion process, I imagine it not to be at roughly the same time, right? I feel like I would imagine it's a slow process. I don't have evidence to show that it happened all at once. In fact, I've got this, which would logically move me away from this point. So C falls. Then I'm looking at D, and D's just comfortable, right? That bajillion years ago, we had these two families. Then they broke apart. Then they got some things. It's not very exciting, but getting the answer feels good. Two more. 13 is one that I am going to be honest that it probably was from your standpoint. You read these suckers a bunch, and they all felt so darn similar. I don't know if that's true, but they all seem to be like saying things about women and gender roles and expectations. Whoops, there's women over here, and then D's statement about woman is here. And it's so scary. Juggling that might be too much. So you want to see the other side of it. When I looked, because I got stuck on the woman thing first, reading this text and kind of freaking out. Let's do where we looked in the text first, my bad. When I go to the text, I read the final part. As I read the final part, the allowing, attending to this context, this is another signal element that bumps me back a sentence. So then I keep reading. I read all of this. We should instead is another signal element that's going to kick me back another sentence. So I have to read like all of this. And I could even grant that the is another signal element because it's been defined, and you read the whole thing, right? That's why I jumped over to the right. You read the whole thing. Sucks to be you. Sucks to be us, right? But sometimes we have to. Then we go juggling. All of this concept about women was too much for me to juggle. And I started focusing on the other side of the equation. Something that I know everybody who's looking at this question misses, and this is the critical component, is that as we deal with the second component, marginalization of certain types of art, when we look at its equivalent here, expectations placed on Chicano artists here, and then in this last one, the muralist's depiction, it's in these, and this is what I meant to circle in the first one, the second components of each of these dual demands is so strong. And I'm going to make the extremely hot take that you don't realize in A and D that these things are just wiggity whack, obviously so. This sentence, from a reading comprehension standpoint, you have to think of like who the heat is on. Who are they throwing smoke at? D seems to be saying that the critique is about the way that the muralists made things, but the way that the muralists made things, right? And the way it presented the people. But that's not what this is saying. It feels like it is because you'll read the word restricted a bunch. But it's the establishment, man. It's the establishment that is doing restricting. They care about muralists and they don't care about non-muralists. So it's not how that they were depicted. It's more like that they were used, right? That muralists were chosen over non-muralists. Once that critical reading comprehension is found, D is an easy fall, A is an easy fall, right? Because it's kind of doing the same thing. It's not the muralists that were frustrated, it's the non-muralists that were frustrated. This question is so tricky. Making that shift is so special, but you just have to realize when you're taking this test, if it ever feels like they're all identical or there are parts that you don't understand, it's like a definition, right? Sometimes it's crazy and abstract, like how GDP grows or where we get limited capital, but sometimes it's a little bit more accessible. Then when I'm in this final component, I'm just looking for signal elements. This seems to be like equal importance as guided by the doubly and the and. This is putting all of the burden on them both being equal, whereas this one is rather than, some sort of contrast. When I look for signal elements, I've got this beautiful instead, I've got this beautiful but, and we lead to allowing this context. We know that we're shifting with this contrast that's present. 14, our final one, only in 45 minutes and 30 seconds. That's fine. This is my favorite thing to do in this world. Final question. Let's look at this sucker. So we do the exact same process. We dig into the last sentence to see something that's logical, and then we can start digging into things. If you were to read this, because according to the civil code with widely unsuitable trade, speculative crisis, I don't know if we'd have to read a previous sentence in this. But, man, did we for both of these? We almost did for all of these. So maybe we can read more, because once you start reading this threshold of 8, that's how we'll do it. You read this, threshold higher than 80, where the heck am I getting this number from? Then you have to unlock reading more. So you read, LOL, everything again, right? That's for these hard questions you have to. On the easy ones, sometimes you can get away with just being a little gangster in the second part. So I've read that second part, and on a first read, I would say that A feels okay, right? On a first read, I would say that B feels okay. Man, I'd even say that some of us on a first read, C would feel okay. So we can just table these things. D, though, we should be able to kill, right? Why the heck would I want more copper when copper is the problem, right? D falls. If on test day we chose A, B, or C, and we went around with our lives, right? We were running out of time. This is our final question. We've only got 30 seconds. We raced through these to kill any obvious ones. I'd feel good about that. But we're hanging out, right? It's late at night. It's a good day. Let's push a little bit more. I think the next most obvious one to fall would be this one. And once you understand the nuance for this one, then we'd understand it. Why it's not C is, this is the ratio, right? 74.2, 24.7 is the ratio, which is like, oof, right? We don't really like that. When we recognize also that they were under oppressive financial obligations, increasing the weight, but keeping the proportions the same is literally just pouring more silver, which is the expense, into this problem. So then C falls, right? This would just create more of the problem. I have heavier coins with the same proportion. I've got to do something to play with the proportions to get me out of this pickle. And the heavier coin would just make me more financially in ruin. I know that when you look at A and B, they're going to seem identical, because we can appreciate from the standpoint that, we'll look at B first, keep the amount of silver consistent. So if it's this ratio, just like imagine it at grams for a moment, right? Keep the amount of silver consistent with the coins of 367, but decrease their weight. Well, if it's like the amount that's present and we're decreasing the weight, the only way to do that is to pull the copper down. That's the only way to do it. And that's a beautiful choice here, right? We're pulling the copper down. We're spending the same amount of dollary dues. And we're in a good spot. Now for the hard one. Oh, we'll say that's the answer in a second. Now for the hard one. A feels similar, right? So if I'm going to proclaim the percentage of silver suitable trade should be raised to a threshold higher than 80%, you could imagine that it's 85%, which is going to be a huge burden. And that's absolutely not what we want to do. But let's say like we want to proclaim that the percentage of silver in coins is higher by lowering copper. And you can kind of like talk your way into A and B being identical. But the big brain move that you have to make is that the threshold higher than 80 puts us way too far past what we want. If right now we can skate by and still sell things at this ratio, why are we going to shoot to a much higher percentage that we don't have to go to? It'd be like if we want to limit crashes because people are going like 80 miles an hour. Someone's solution might be, well, like, hey, let's lower it to 40. But then we're like ruining all of our goodwill. We're ruining like the financial obligations equivalent. What we can do instead is just kind of set it at 65 and hold people accountable for that thing. And that's like the best way that I can explain why A is wrong. That we kind of betray the financial obligation. And that's all that we've got. We've done the whole thing. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you for your time. If you stuck around, that's all that we got. Right? I just want to hit like higher than 80. If it had said like exactly 80, maybe. But this would betray. This is like claiming. Sorry, I just really got to hit this because I know that I don't think that landed. Higher than 80, right, could mean that we're spending more money than we have to in order to secure the ratio flop. Whereas this, we just cut down on this, we're going to hit it immediately, and everything's fine. We don't necessarily have to hit an absorbent number. That's all we got. All right, I'm gone for good. Bye.